In 1990, the Bessie Burton Sullivan Skilled Nursing Residence housed 135 elders, nearly filling its 139 resident capacity, and employed 200 nurses and administrative staff. Many of the residents were longtime Alzheimer's sufferers, and a third of them were on Medicaid. In 2007, Seattle University announced their decision to close the Bessie Burton Nursing Home. University Senior Vice President Tim Leary cited a growing student population as the need to close Bessie Burton and replace it with student dorms. He also explained that the nursing home fell outside of Seattle University's core mission of educating students, although the nursing home was opened under the assumption that it would be an asset for nursing students to engage with elder community members. The university denied claims that it was closing Bessie Burton because of financial reasons, although Tim Leary did concede that, to quote, "it wasn't a moneymaker." All 135 residents and 200 staff were given 60-day notice to find somewhere else to go, an especially difficult task for the large group of residents that were dependent on federal assistance. Today, Bessie Burton Sullivan Skilled Nursing Residence is known as Chardon Hall, home to the 140 students that live there. We wonder how many students know the history of the facility they live in today.
I don't know. I think that it's very indicative of the university's growing pain that I think a lot of students have felt, and I think that it's something that probably had to happen for the university to continue to grow. However, I do think that it was a very sad occurrence for the families that had elderly patients and nursing home patients here, and it's a very difficult transition to find a nursing home. I feel bad for the families of the residents that formerly lived here, and I think that as a Jesuit university, I think situations like that should be handled with care. And as someone who wasn't here in the time of transition, I don't really know how much care was handled in terms of telling those families and allowing them to find time to find another home, or what that transition looked like for the school. But it's interesting living here and kind of thinking about the people that used to live in these rooms before me.
Bessie Burton was never truly a public space. It was owned by a private university, and access to the facility was limited to residents and students of Seattle U. However, the utilization of the space was not for accumulation of capital, but rather for the maintenance of community elders' health and enrichment of nursing education. Its function as a private space was to protect and serve public communities. This seems to complicate what we know about privatization.
I don't think it would ever be hidden. What I knew about it was essentially that it was a senior citizen home based upon the structure and how it's all, the environment of it.
Yes.
It has really large elevators because the elevators were for hospital beds to be able to transport people back and forth in the room hallways, right? It was renamed a Jesuit.
Yes.
Yeah.
By a Jesuit, for a Jesuit. So.
Oh, yeah, that's bad. Brian Hooks, Assistant Director, Residential Life. Gentrification, it's really interesting because it's the balance, right? Like, how do you keep a city flourishing? How do you keep communities flourishing and improving, but not change the dynamic of that community? And gentrification in its current format changes the dynamics of communities. It changes communities while it's supposed to be modernizing, improving communities. And so it hasn't struck the delicate balance. It's too one-sided, particularly over those with the ability, the have-tos, right? The haves get the gentrification because it's more geared towards them in a sense of who has the money to afford all these new lavish things compared to making it accessible to the folks that are currently there and also potentially mixing in new people into that community to keep it vibrant. So I think gentrification in its current structure moves away from community sense.
My name is Kelvin Pepera, recent graduate of Seattle University, graduated from the Masters of Psychology program here. sorry about profanities, but in the profanities, I think you can feel my emotion about these kind of issues. Like, it is, I don't know, it's incredibly selfish, and it's just incredibly selfish to do that. It's like me, like discover something that's for the community, but because you think you have money, you can do something. Like, that's basically what that is. That's basically all it is. It's people who have money believing they can just do whatever they want to other people. And I don't know, they're gonna come back and bite you one day, but at the same time, it's not really moral to do that to the community.
Systemic violence is a very strong word. It's very strong wording. I think it's true. It's maybe not something that I would necessarily use, but I can't. There's no fault in it. It's just really dense. That's a lot to try to absorb.
Yeah.
To most degrees, yes. The system is set up for the majority identities, and I get trying to keep it to the system is set up for white males because that's what it was structured on, right? Like, that's the beginning since the founding fathers, right? Like, foundation of the Constitution is based upon white owning class, which then opened up to white people in general because they saw that the poor folks were siding with poor people of color at the time, immigrants, and they were coming together because of the classist system. So how the structure has built out has been to keep those levels of those communities to be separate.
Like, that's insane to me. Like, I came, and I visited, this central district, and, seen what it's there now. But to hear that a few years ago, that it was so bad that, the city would even, want to put a bus route there is incredible to me. And just seeing it now and, hearing about, it used to be, predominantly black. That's where all the black folks were. Seeing it now, it's hard to believe that even used to be the case, because it's so white. Like, it's just people walking their dogs, all these different shops, all these ugly ass box buildings. Sorry, that's how I feel about those box. They're just so incredibly unoriginal. But all these things, you wouldn't even believe it. But for me, it just kind of symbolizes that, it's really fucked up, because for years, people knew what was going down there, right? But they ignored it. But only when the land became valuable did they actually then see it worth something and then start paying attention to it. And then they use the power that they have, aka money, to drive people out. That is inhumane. You don't do that to other human beings. You don't ignore them for years while you know that there's crime, there's all these things, drugs, all these things happening there. But then only when the things that they've held on to, whatever little that it might have been, becomes valuable, you could then go after it and say, hey, then justify what you're doing by saying, well, if you can't afford it, I'm sorry, but you gotta go. But then you had ignored them, the city had ignored them for all this time. So that's, I don't know, man. It's incredibly immoral to use the excuse of money than to justify the actions. Because, if you make the case, then there should be no reason that people complain about bills or anything like that, because I could say, well, I'm sorry you can't afford it, but like, it sucks, you suck. Like, so I don't know. It's, you can't keep using the excuse of money to justify the wrong things that happen to other human beings, because I don't know, it's fucked up. I don't know. That's what I'm gonna say, because it wipes away everything. Gentrification just comes in, wipes it out, and then when it's no longer valuable, I don't know, it just throws it away without taking regard to the people that lived there, the memories that were made there, what it meant to them to, live in quote unquote the ghetto, but to be ignored by society at large. But this is where we're at, right? And then to just come in and then push them away and not even have any sense of remorse about it, or the consideration for that is just so incredibly
Our housing has an interesting component to that because we are landlocked. For example, the Douglas and Vi Hilbert, the new buildings that are, Vi Hilbert, the new building, but the partnership buildings that we have then make it, are very specific to Seattle University students. And so with those areas opening up, it may relieve some of the stress that SU students have in trying to find affordable housing in the surrounding area. Because then more students are able to hopefully find better deals to live either on campus or closer to campus versus having to spread out into the Central District area. The question becomes, with that potential gap being out in the Central District area, in Capitol Hill area, because that may not, that revenue may transition back to the campus area, are they going to fill that void with affordable housing, which is stipulated for students, right? Because students that go out into the greater area fall potentially under Section 8 housing affordability rules, right? And so they can be, property managers are more inclined to have a student in there because they know that they can fit under Section 8 housing, and then they will help them fill out that paperwork. Will that access still be given to people of color that aren't associated with the university, aren't associated with like the tech industry, right? Because that's a huge drive of the property amounts across Seattle, like, because that group is coming in. So I don't know. I think our footprint it's theirs, definitely. There's a balancing act to it. Like, how much do we as an institution try to offset our impact of our students into the greater community? How do we offset that with the works that they do? Like, are they providing good works, service, giving back to that community to offset potentially the financial impact that's happening in those areas? And a lot of students stay in Seattle as well once they graduate. I think that's an interesting conversation to have, is like, once they graduate, how many actually stay within the area and actually are giving back in different ways to the communities that they have now kind of adopted as their own, and feeling a part of it? Because there's a lot of folks that are in the nonprofit sector, a lot of students that stay after graduating and move into the nonprofit sector that are providing services in the community more directly. It's kind of interesting. We do have conversations around on topics of our impact, particularly as we navigate Capitol Hill and as we navigate Central District. I don't know how many of our staff are connected in that way to Central District, to Capitol Hill, that are actually actively engaged. As our work is pretty intensive, and as we live and work here, the majority of us live and work here. We probably, for myself, I know I spend a lot more time getting outside of Cap Hill Central District to try to to have a separation because I live and work here pretty much all the time. Now, when it comes to rates, we definitely have a conversation of looking at what's the rates in the greater area and how do we make it comparable and how do we make it affordable for our folks. Like, it actually is a great service for us to keep our rates lower than what is marketable out there, because we want to bring students on campus. We want them here with us, and now that we are expanding our housing inventory, we even more so are going to want students to be coming back to us to see us as a viable option for their housing, which will then hopefully open up, as a result of that, will open up to the greater community to have the ability to find the housing that is going to be supplemented, right? But there's always going to be students in their juniors and senior years that are going to want to find housing off campus because they want that experience, right? They want that transition off versus having to be on campus. So it's a balancing act. Like, how many folks are going to really stick to finding a position off to how many folks are okay to stay on campus for all 4 years of their experience, right? It's a little bit of both, right? Because I would have to say this, our students are amazing. And so I don't think that them being out in the community is a bad thing, right? I think they actually contribute significantly to the community, to the areas. I think they also can be a great example to kids out in the Central District area, right? Like, and I think having that out in communities actually is a great thing, especially if they're interactive and they're being positive representations of the values of Seattle University. I actually think that's a benefit to the community. I don't think that's a detraction. Now, their buying power is pretty much almost the same as anyone that lives in that community, right? They're unfortunately at poverty levels, right? They're not making a ton of money because they're going to school and spending 8 hours out of their day at school, and then potentially also at whatever side job that they have to be able to maintain their cost of living. So they're pretty much at the same level as the members of that community are. So if anything, I think they're providing a different experience for all the community members there, and more realistically to say that, like, this opportunity for folks is there for everyone. Now, if it's at Seattle University, well, great, but if it, it is expensive here. It is a pricey school, but there's opportunities for you to better yourself. So I think that's a great thing. Right, I think the negative piece comes into how are we using our privilege as a institution, right? Like, and I think some of the tricky points, I don't know if it's necessary because of Seattle University or particularly where we are placed within Seattle, being Capitol Hill, but the luxury apartments that are getting built up, that are kind of getting built up surrounding the campus, is definitely a detraction. And I don't know how much of that is because Seattle University is where it is, or because of the cost of the land in this area, right? Like, I don't know how to balance that, if that's the negative part of us. Like, because who we are and where we are, it's attractive for businesses to come around this location and build up the area, which would be the negative aspect. How we are showing up in the community really depends upon if we're going to be that negative or positive. I think the things that are out of our control is how other people see this area and see either the benefit of Seattle University being here or it's not being beneficial to the community. I think if we were a closed campus, I think it would be definitely a negative aspect for us. If we were actually close to anyone being in here that wasn't a part of Seattle U, I think it would be a huge difference of how our town and gown relationships were. But I actually think we have a decent town and gown relationship at this point. So open campus means, like, there are rarely any physical barriers stopping anyone from being able to cross into campus, right? I think there may be one physical barrier over between Chardon and Campion, right? That limits the amount of access that that non-affiliate SU people having access to get across our grounds. Our ground space is pretty much any of the hidden little gems that are around here on campus. That the little tucked away gardens in between Loyola and Casey building, the back area of the admin building, the tea garden, Campion Tea Garden, like those little gyms are still all open to the public, right? None of those are closed off necessarily. You'll see the Union Green generally is closed off, and it's closed for maintenance. And they'll put up there to say like, hey, due to maintenance, we are closing this down. But that means it's closed not only to community members, but it's also closed to SU members. So it's closed to everybody. But then there's just so many different areas that anyone can walk on campus and be able to access. So that's what makes it an open campus, essentially. Now, going into our buildings is a different matter. Like residence halls, will technically at some point will be shutting down access for folks to be able to get into the residence halls. And only if you are a SU person or you're a guest of someone. But during the daytime, like the academic buildings are open, people can access those spaces, access the lobby areas. So there's a lot, there's people that can non-affiliates be able to access the lunch area. C Street, they can go buy lunch there. And not have to necessarily have a SU ID to do that. So,
But not like in and of itself.
I don't know if we have that big of a footprint within Central District, right? Because technically the line is Jefferson, right? And so our physical footprint really stops at Jefferson and
14th. Right, because we lease a building, the actual Jefferson building we lease, which is across from the fitness center, that's at 14th and Jefferson, right? So if we're there, and then our footprint on the other side is Madison, and...
Kind of weird, it kind of goes like 12th, because we're no longer at the Bullitt Center, I don't think. So our physical footprint isn't ginormous. Now, when you go to our students and where our students are operating into a larger area of that, I think we do have an impact in the community for sure. I don't know how much we're impacting gentrification. I mean, the redoing of the youth detention center is super interesting. I don't know how much at Seattle University we could have input in what the city government,
Didn't we technically vote for it? Didn't we end up voting for it?
I don't know.
As a board?
I don't know if the trustees did. If they did, then that represents us as a gentrifying force.
Africa Town is going to be, I think, it's going to span like a block or two. And it's going to be at the 23rd and Union intersection. I think that's where it's going to begin. That used to be a predominantly African-American community. I don't know if you guys know about Earl's Cuts, but quite well known in the community as well. That's kind of where it's at. But it was bought by some developers who I think want to, develop the land and build up some of those apartments that are popping up all over the city. And in working with, I believe, the city of Seattle, as well as Africatown, the organization itself, they kind of came to agreements where, the place or the building would get Africatown, but hopefully it would be kind of influenced, whatever the building may look like, will be influenced by the community at large that, that live there as well as used to live there due to gentrification and all that stuff. So at first they kind of came with what our idea of what project or the space will look like. The buildings are going to look like this, they're going to be spaced out like this and whatnot. And they kind of was like, this is our initial plan, but we would like to hear from the community, if there needs to be some adjustments and whatnot. So we were divided into 4 different groups to come up with different ideas of, what Africatown would look like or could look like, how it could be, true to the name Africatown. And it was, firstly, it was amazing, it was incredible seeing all these different ideas come about from different people, like, hearing stories about, people that used to hang out around Earl's Cuts quite a bit, and hearing about how it's so important to kind of preserve this corner of the block because it symbolizes the part, the corner of the block where people used to just hang out and whatnot. Because it's people saying, no, this used to be this is ours, right? This is our community. This is what, even though we're ignored, this was ours. And to place Africatown in the heart of, I think, the Central District, because everybody knows Earl's Cuts, everybody knows that neighborhood. To put it there, and I think there is quite a few black-owned stores along that block as well, but they're gonna get bulldozed when time's up. I think they have a year or 2, and then it's gonna begin construction. But to place that monument there for these people who have been pushed to Renton or wherever to come back and bring their kids, because people that don't live there now, now that live in Renton do come back on the regular. I was in Earl's Cuts some time ago, and I was talking to people who were like, I used to live here, but I live in Renton now because couldn't afford it. But they still come just to hang out with Earl. That's crazy to me. Renton's far, but people put in the time because that's what it means to them. So to put it there in that space, I think, is a sign of resistance for people to claim that this was ours. For me, I kind of see, this idea as well as, why they even wanted to do that in the first place is, because the developers want to stand out. So, they want to be like, well, we're not just another building. Hey, look at this. This used to be where all the black people are at. This is Africatown, to make it look different. But also at the same time, I see what it means to the people who actually believe in the name Africatown and what it could actually be and what it symbolizes. And I think that gives me hope. So I think it'll go well. I mean, I can't not hope, right? Because then I already lost the battle before it even began, right? So, yeah, I think it'll go well. I think people will be able to cement their identity into Africatown to actually have it symbolize and mean what it's supposed to.
I think we are a gentrifying force. I just don't know at what level of impact that is. And I think it can be balanced. I think we have some good. I think the work we do with Center for Community Engagement and trying to have positive impacts within our surrounding communities, and the work that doesn't go through there, right? There's a ton that students do that we don't identify. There's a ton that staff and faculty do that we don't do, right? I think there's a lot more good than bad that I think we're a good force versus a negative force in the community. But we'll see. Time will tell.